said my voice was too soft, like a whisper through the rain. They laughed and called me names that wrapped around me like a chain. Hid my dreams in quiet halls, sang to shadows, kept them small. But every note I buried deep still called me from the walls. And I've been scared to shine, afraid to sound too bright. But silence never saved me when they turned out all the light.
They didn't even bother whispering when they mocked him. In a middle school tucked behind pine woods and football fields in rural North Carolina, Jesse Whitman became a walking punchline before he even hit 13. His voice didn't boom like the other boys. It wavered, soft, gentle, slightly slurred at the edges. A natural lisp that turned S's into S's and made him sound, as one boy shouted across the lunchroom, like a cartoon princess choking on glitter. He didn't fight back. He never did. Jesse kept his head down, eyes on the scuffed linoleum floors, earbuds tucked deep, playing the only thing that made him feel alive: Disney songs. Not just any, the ballads, Let It Go, Part of Your World, Reflection. While the others posted about sneakers and quarterbacks, Jesse wrote lyrics in the back of his homework notebook, careful to keep the margins neat and the notes hidden. Home wasn't kinder. His father, Mark Whitman, was a former Marine who believed in silence, discipline, and sons who didn't cry. Mark never said the word gay, but he had a way of shutting Jesse down with just a glance. Once, after hearing him sing Colors of the Wind behind a closed bedroom door, Mark barged in, ripped the cassette out of the player, and muttered, "No son of mine sings like that." Then he walked out. That night, Jesse didn't cry. He just stared at the blank spot where his tape used to be, his hands trembling, not with fear, but with the terrible question that looped in his mind: what if I never get to be myself? Only his mother, Luann, offered warmth in small, quiet ways. She worked nights as a hospital nurse, came home smelling of antiseptic and coffee, and always left him tiny folded notes in his lunchbox. Sometimes just a line: "Your voice is your light." Other times you sing what I never had the courage to. But no note could drown out the snickers that followed Jesse through hallways. Not when Derek Foster, the golden boy, quarterback, and son of the school's gym coach, started filming Jesse singing quietly to himself in the bathroom stalls. The video spread fast on the school's closed social network. They added captions like, "Elsa has entered the building," or "Let it go, bro." Jesse stopped using the bathroom at school altogether. He stopped eating lunch in the cafeteria too. Instead, he found a quiet corner in the back of the school library, behind rows of forgotten encyclopedias, where the light came in soft and nobody looked. There, with earbuds in and backpack on his lap, Jesse would mouth the words to songs no one wanted to hear. No one but him. He didn't perform. He didn't raise his hand in music class. He didn't audition for the school play. He just waited for the day he might grow out of his softness, or his voice might fix itself, or for someone to notice. But not for fame, not for applause, just for the chance to sing without being punished. He never said the word gay aloud, even to himself, but he knew what people meant when they said it around him. The way they stretched it like a weapon, the way they laughed like it was a diagnosis. He felt it in the way Mark wouldn't look him in the eye during dinner, in the way his classmates smirked when he walked into a room. He carried that silence like a second backpack, heavier than books, impossible to take off, until one ordinary Thursday afternoon, in music class, a new teacher named Miss Carter asked each student to stand up and sing one verse of their favorite song. Some kids chose rap, others did TikTok dances, one kid beatboxed. Jesse tried to disappear behind the desk, but his name was already on the list. And before he could think of a lie, Ms. Carter had called him up. The room shifted, chairs squeaked. Derek laughed under his breath. Jesse stood at the front, too short for the spotlight, too frozen to speak. He looked down at his shoes, at his notebook clutched in white fingers. Then, without background music, without looking up, he sang, "The snow glows white on the mountain tonight. not a footprint to be seen. There were no cheers, no applause, only laughter. Louder than ever. He left the room before the chorus, ran until the hallway was empty, until the bell rang, until even his shoes couldn't take him farther. But what Jesse didn't know was that Ms. Carter hadn't laughed. She hadn't looked away. She had watched him. Every word, every tremble, every raw, imperfect sound, and she'd felt something no one else in that room had noticed. She had heard him, and she wasn't going to forget. If this story already echoes something inside you, if you've ever been told your softness was a weakness, or your passion a punchline, don't let it go. Subscribe to Heart Stories to keep following Jesse's journey. What happens next will silence even the loudest laughter. Ms. Emily Carter had only been teaching at Winslow Middle School for a few months when she met Jesse Whitman. In her first week, she noticed the pattern, how the room shifted when he entered, how some students stopped whispering only long enough to laugh. She saw how Jesse always sat near the back, close to the wall, close to the exit. He never volunteered. But he never missed a note when she played the piano either. After the disastrous moment in class when Jesse sang and fled, Ms. Carter didn't try to console him with forced kindness. She knew better than to chase a wounded student down the hall like a concerned savior. Instead, she waited. The next day, she found him in the library. Same time, same corner. She walked slowly, careful not to startle him, and sat across from him without a word. He didn't look up. Not at first. She slid a folded piece of paper across the table. One line, "I heard you." "I don't think they did. Would you sing for me again?" No demands, no pressure, just an invitation. Jesse stared at it, then tucked it into his backpack without speaking. 3 days passed. No reply. On the fourth afternoon, just after dismissal, Jesse appeared at the music room door, quiet, still wearing his backpack like armor. "Miss..." Carter simply gestured to the piano bench and said, "No one else is here. No one needs to be." Jesse stood frozen, eyes locked on the scuffed floor tiles. Then, slowly, he pulled a worn notebook from his bag. The edges were frayed, the pages covered in careful handwriting lyrics, notes, sketches of snowflakes, and castle towers. He opened to a familiar page. Let it go. He didn't ask for accompaniment. He didn't ask if it was okay. He just began. There was no microphone, no stage, just a cold piano room with faded posters and dust. But Jesse's voice filled it raw, trembling, too quiet in some parts, too sharp in others, but unmistakably honest. There was no mimicry, no performance, just a child who had something inside him that couldn't stay silent. Ms. Carter didn't interrupt. She didn't compliment him afterward. She just nodded, gently placed her phone face down on the piano bench, and said, "That's the voice I wanted to hear." Jesse didn't know she had recorded it, not for social media, not for evidence, but because it felt wrong to let something that real vanish into the empty air. Later that night, she played the recording again. Once, then twice. She didn't know what startled her more, the emotion in the song or the ache she felt in her chest when it ended. She thought about a flyer she had received just that morning from the State Department of Education. It was a call for submissions, a statewide search for one student to sing at the inauguration of the newly elected governor. The theme, the future in their voice. Most submissions would come from elite schools, big cities, kids with headshots and vocal coaches and YouTube channels. Jesse Whitman had none of that, just a cheap backpack, a soft lisp, and a voice no one had ever really heard. She submitted the recording that night, didn't tell anyone, not even Jesse. She knew the odds, but she also knew what she'd felt, and that was enough. Meanwhile, Jesse continued drifting through school like a ghost. Derek Foster uploaded another clip from months ago, dubbing it with squeaky sound effects. It made the rounds again, this time edited with a frozen blue overlay and the words, "Let It Go, Rejected Edition." Jesse saw it. Of course, he always saw it. But something had changed in him since that afternoon in the music room. A strange flicker, small, quiet, but undeniably present. For the first time, he hadn't sung to hide or escape. He had sung because someone wanted him to, and that made it different. Then, one Monday morning, while Jesse sat at his desk reviewing math notes, the loudspeaker clicked on. Attention students, faculty, please join us in congratulating one of our own, Jesse Whitman, who has been selected to perform at the governor's inauguration ceremony next week in Raleigh. Jesse will represent the youth of our state with a live performance chosen from among hundreds of submissions. The silence in the room was sharp, shocked, then laughter, disbelief. A pencil dropped, a gasp. Someone said, "That has to be a mistake." But Jesse sat still, staring straight ahead, face unreadable. Somewhere behind him, Derek whispered, "They're seriously letting the gay frozen kids sing for the governor." And Jesse, who had always sunk lower in his seat, always curled inward, didn't move. Not an inch. Because for the first time in his life, he wasn't apologizing for who he was. When he got home that evening, his mother was already standing in the living room with a letter in her hands. Her fingers trembled, her face was red from crying, but her smile was steady. "They chose you," she said, barely above a whisper. And Jesse, voice shaking but steady, answered, "I think it's the first time someone did." What he didn't know, what no one knew, was that the biggest test hadn't arrived yet, because news travels fast in small towns, especially to a father who didn't like the way his son's voice made him feel. And Mark Whitman had just heard the announcement too. The letter sat on the dining table, still in its navy envelope, sealed with the golden crest of the state of North Carolina. Luann hadn't opened it right away. She waited for Jesse to get home from school, even though her hands had been trembling for hours. The official tone, the unexpected delivery, it had to be real. But she needed to hear it from the source, to see it in his eyes when he read it for himself. When Jesse walked in that evening, backpack heavy and shoulders slouched, he noticed the silence first. No local news humming in the background, no pots on the stove. Just his mother standing still, holding something that didn't belong in their small, worn home. She offered the envelope without a word. He peeled it open slowly, careful not to tear the emblem. The words on the paper weren't long, but they hit like a flood. The letter confirmed what the announcement had already revealed. Jesse had been chosen, among hundreds of applicants, for his authenticity, for the emotion in his voice, for the courage it took to sound like himself. And then, as if the universe couldn't bear the quiet joy for too long, the front door opened. Mark Whitman stepped into the room. He didn't glance at the envelope. His eyes locked on Jesse's face, then on Luann's. The air thickened. He had already heard. "The hell is this?" he asked. Luann tried to keep her voice calm. "He was chosen to sing for the governor. It's an honor, an honor." Mark snatched the letter from Jesse's hands. "They're putting him on TV to sing that cartoon garbage again." "What's next? Dress and makeup?" Jesse's lips parted. But no sound came. Mark wasn't yelling yet. He didn't need to. His tone was cutting enough. "You know what this makes us look like. Luann, you know what people already say behind my back, that we've got a boy who doesn't know what he is." Luann stood her ground. "He knows exactly who he is." Mark turned to Jesse. "Is this what you want to be? A damn spectacle?" Jesse didn't answer. He just looked at the letter lying now, crumpled at the edge of the table, and something inside him began to crack, not from shame, but from exhaustion, from carrying that silence for too long. That night, he stayed up late at the kitchen table. The letter, carefully smoothed out and taped at the folds, sat beside him. A Chromebook borrowed from the school library was open. With trembling fingers, he filled out the confirmation form, typed in his name, attached the required documents. Click submit. He didn't tell his father. He didn't tell anyone. He just waited. The next few days passed like a blur. Whispers followed him through hallways. A few teachers smiled with awkward encouragement. Others avoided eye contact. No one knew what to say to the boy whose voice had brought national attention, but who still walked alone to class. Only Ms. Carter met his gaze directly, every time. The day before they were set to leave for Raleigh, Jesse returned home to find his father sitting at the kitchen table, holding a printed schedule from the event's website. His name was listed clearly: youth soloist Jesse Whitman. "You're still going," Mark said, not asking. Jesse stood frozen. His father didn't look angry, just tight, like something inside him had been pulled too far and was now rigid with restraint. "I already told your aunt you wouldn't be showing up," Mark continued. "No one in this family needs to see this circus." Luann entered the room behind them. She placed a hand on Jesse's shoulder. "He's going, and I'm going with him." Mark laughed once. Sharp. "Of course you are." Then, without another word, he stood up and walked out the door. Not in rage, just in disbelief. Like he was watching something break that couldn't be fixed. The next morning, long before the sun rose, Jesse and his mother boarded the Greyhound bus to Raleigh. She carried a duffel bag packed with sandwiches, dress shoes, and the only dress shirt he owned. Jesse carried the folder with his lyrics, and that patched-up letter now flattened inside a sheet protector, as if it were something sacred. Neither of them spoke much on the ride, but every now and then, Luann would reach over and squeeze his hand. At the halfway point, she pulled out a folded napkin with her handwriting on it. "When they tell you to quiet down, that's when you sing louder." It wasn't until they were nearly at the city that Jesse finally let out a breath. He still didn't feel ready, but for the first time, he felt like he had permission to be heard. And back in that small town where rumors grew faster than trees, Mark Whitman sat alone on the porch, letter in hand, staring at the name printed neatly at the top, rereading the words again and again, as if they might rearrange into something he could accept. The capital felt like a different planet. Everything in Raleigh seemed bigger, faster, louder, the kind of place where no one cared who you were or what town you came from, as long as you kept moving. For Jesse, it was both terrifying and freeing. He didn't have to dodge Derek Foster in the hallway or hear whispered slurs outside the library, but he also couldn't shake the weight in his chest, the feeling that this was all still borrowed time. They arrived at the auditorium 2 days before the ceremony. The building towered above them, red brick, glass arches, and marble steps polished like mirrors. Inside, the rehearsal hall echoed with music and voices that sounded nothing like his. There were students from art schools with choreographers, vocal coaches, and designer bags. A girl from Charlotte warmed up scales with perfect pitch while scrolling her phone. A boy from Asheville adjusted the lapels of his fitted tuxedo while giving a live stream tour of the green room. Jesse wore a wrinkled button-down, slacks his mom had hemmed by hand, and a navy tie too long for his frame. The only accessory that stood out was the small, circular pin fastened to his collar, a rainbow flag, no bigger than a quarter. No one commented on it. They just glanced once, then looked away. During rehearsal, the coordinator called out performance orders. Jesse was listed last. "Solo act, no accompaniment," she asked, eyebrows raised. "Yes, ma'am," Jesse replied softly. "You sure you don't want a piano track?" He shook his head. "I'd like it quiet." She scribbled a note. "Your call." That night, back at the budget motel 2 blocks from the auditorium, Jesse stared at himself in the bathroom mirror. The tie still looked wrong. His voice still cracked on high notes, and his hands wouldn't stop shaking. Luann noticed. She didn't say anything, just took a folded piece of paper from her purse and handed it to him. Inside was the note Jesse had left in her lunchbox years ago, back when she'd pulled double shifts and he used to pack her meals before school. It read, "I hope your day is bright, even if mine isn't. Love, Jesse." She had saved it. "You've always known how to speak," she said gently, "even when you weren't talking." The next morning, the ceremony began under overcast skies. The venue buzzed with security, reporters, state officials, and the governor's team, rows of polished chairs filled with suits and pearls. Teleprompters blinked quietly from behind velvet ropes. The performances began, classical arias, jazz quartets, gospel harmonies. They were flawless, clean, big. Jesse stood backstage, eyes fixed on his name on the program. Youth soloist Let It Go. A stagehand asked if he was ready. He nodded, but he wasn't. Not really. He gripped the lyric sheet so tightly the edges curled in. Then Ms. Carter's voice echoed in his memory. That's the voice I wanted to hear. His mother's voice followed. When they tell you to quiet down. A stage manager gestured. Go. The lights felt hotter than he imagined. They blurred the crowd, but he knew where his mother sat third row, slightly left, hands clasped in her lap, and he knew with certainty that his father was not there. Jesse stepped up to the microphone. A hush settled slowly. There was no piano, no strings, no backing vocals, just breath. He opened his mouth and sang. The snow glows white on the mountain tonight. At first, a cough, a chair creaked. Someone in the back whispered, but by the second line, the room began to still. The melody rose, soft but unwavering, like frost spreading across glass. His lisp didn't vanish. It danced inside the lyrics, shaping them differently. His voice wasn't polished, wasn't trained, but it was lived in. It carried sleepless nights, bathroom stalls, crumpled lunch notes. It carried shame. And then, for the first time, it carried no apology. Every note fell into the quiet like a secret. By the time he reached the final chorus, the auditorium had forgotten how to breathe. Let the storm rage on. His voice cracked. Once, just once, but he didn't stop. The cold never bothered me anyway. Then came silence. Not hesitation, not awkwardness, but reverence. No one clapped. Not yet. It was as if the song hadn't ended, but drifted upward, and everyone was waiting for it to land. Then it did. One pair of hands started the applause. Slow, deliberate, then another, and another. The standing ovation began not in a rush, but like a tide rising gently row by row, person by person, until the entire hall stood. But Jesse didn't see them. His eyes had already found what mattered. And in the very back, near the last row, standing in a worn jacket and boots, still dusted with road salt, was Mark Whitman. Not clapping, not smiling, just standing, hands at his ceiling, eyes red, letter folded in his chest pocket, and for once, not saying anything at all. Jesse stood beneath the lights, unsure whether to bow, speak, or cry, but he didn't need to do anything more. The boy who was once silenced had made the whole room quiet. The moment lingered longer than Jesse had ever expected. The lights overhead burned warm on his cheeks, but he didn't step back. He didn't move. He didn't need to.
So let me sing true, like the snow that finds its place. Let my softness be the thunder that your silence can't erase. I don't need your standing ovation, I just need to be heard through. I was never wrong for
The applause wasn't loud in the way stadiums are loud. It was measured, earnest. People were clapping not to be polite, but because they didn't know what else to do with what had just happened inside them. Even the governor, seated beside his advisors in the front row, rose to his feet and removed his glasses. He wiped them with a handkerchief and nodded slightly. Not to Jesse as a performer, but to Jesse as a presence, a voice. The boy who had been mocked for a lisp had just made the state's most powerful men forget how to speak. Backstage, Jesse walked slowly, one hand still trembling at his side. He didn't know whether he had done well or not. He didn't know if his voice had cracked more than it should have. He just knew that for the first time he had felt weightless on stage. He had felt true. Luann was waiting at the side of the stage when he stepped into the wings. Her eyes glistened, but she didn't rush forward. She just opened her arms. Jesse collapsed into them without a word. And in that moment, she didn't call him brave, didn't say I'm proud. She just whispered, "You were exactly who you are. That's all I ever prayed for." They returned to the motel late that night. No speeches, no camera crews waiting, no instant fame, just quiet, the kind Jesse had earned, the kind he could finally rest inside. But the world had already begun moving. Someone in the audience had recorded the performance from the fifth row. The video made its way online before they even finished dinner. No edits, no filters, just Jesse standing alone in the spotlight, singing as though he were remembering something everyone else had forgotten. By morning, the clip had been viewed over 3 million times. By noon, 5 million. By the end of the week, it reached 10. The headlines came quickly. Boy with lisp silences. Governor's inauguration. Small-town kid redefines what a soloist looks like. A queer voice they didn't expect and couldn't ignore. And then the calls began. A regional news station wanted to interview him. A conservatory from New York asked about private lessons. A foundation offered a scholarship. But what caught Jesse off guard the most was a voicemail from the Department of Education. They wanted to launch a statewide program promoting creative arts in underfunded schools, particularly for LGBTQ+ youth, and they wanted Jesse to be its first ambassador. He didn't answer right away. He took the rest of the day to walk alone through his neighborhood, his old one, the trees he used to avoid standing near at recess, the sidewalk cracks he used to stare at while pretending he didn't hear the slurs, the same front porch he once stepped off in silence when his father turned away. But that evening, when he returned home, Jesse found an envelope waiting on the table, not from a foundation, not from a school, but from his father. Just a single page. "I still don't understand everything. I don't know what to say, but I watched you and I listened, and I think I finally heard you." At the bottom, scrawled in uneven ink, "If you still want me to be there for anything, I'll come. This time, I'll sit in the front." Jesse folded the letter slowly. He didn't cry. He didn't grin. He just stared out the window for a long time, thinking about all the rooms where his voice had once echoed without anyone hearing. All the times he'd whispered lyrics to himself because no one else wanted them sung aloud. And now the world hadn't just listened. It had waited for him. Not because he was perfect, not because he had power, but because the song wasn't clean. It was real. And sometimes, real is all we need to believe in something again. If you've ever been told your voice didn't belong, or that who you are is too soft, too strange, too different to be heard, what would you say if the world finally listened? We want to hear your voice. Leave a comment below. And subscribe to Hard Stories, because the world needs more stories that remind us we were never meant to stay silent.